Listen to me closely, for this is not a theory but a testimony. This is not a hope but a law fulfilled in my very flesh. I once stood exactly where you may be standing now, tired of wishing, weary of waiting, repeating affirmations with trembling faith and wondering if the universe had misplaced my address. Yet one quiet morning, something ancient stirred within me, and I heard the still small voice say, "Persist, for the word spoken with feeling becomes flesh." I began my 21-day declaration not as a desperate woman begging life to change, but as a daughter of divine abundance claiming what was already ordained. Each day, without fail, I spoke my words as though the unseen had already signed the contract, as though the invisible hand of God was already arranging meetings, moving mountains, canceling delays. I did not watch the clock, I watched my thoughts. I did not ask how, I aligned with nows. For Florence once taught that the subconscious mind knows no joke, no delay, no denial, it accepts feeling as fact, and so I drenched my words in gratitude before the evidence appeared. On days when doubt knocked like an uninvited guest, I answered it with laughter and said, "You are too late, my good is already on its way." Something miraculous happened as the days unfolded, not outside of me at first, but within. My posture changed. My voice softened yet strengthened. I no longer chased signs, signs chased me. Opportunities appeared where doors had been sealed, money arrived from channels I had long forgotten, and peace, oh, that priceless peace, took residence in my mind. By the 21st day, I realized the manifestation was not merely the visible reward, but the woman I had become, unshaken, expectant, divinely indifferent to fear. I learned that repetition is not to convince God, for God is never withholding. Repetition is to silence the old story until the new one sings louder. And so I tell you now, beloved listener, repeat not as a ritual of superstition, but as an act of remembrance. Speak your word with authority, feel it as finished, and rest. For when you move in faith without anxiety, the universe has no choice but to rearrange itself to match your conviction. By the second week of my devotion, I discovered something astonishing. Life does not respond to longing, it responds to knowing. I was no longer whispering my declarations like fragile prayers. I was announcing them as royal decrees, for Florence taught that man's word is his wand, and I had finally learned how to wield it. Each morning I spoke as though the bridge of incidents was already laid beneath my feet, even when my eyes saw only empty space. I declared order where chaos once reigned, supply where lack had mocked me, love where loneliness had echoed for years. And let me confess something sacred to you, I stopped checking. I stopped measuring days, stopped peering anxiously into the mirror of circumstance, because anxiety is nothing but faith turned inside out. Instead, I practiced divine nonchalance, that holy indifference which says, "It is done, therefore I rest." Miracles began to slip into my life quietly, without drama, like old friends returning home. A phone call arrived with perfect timing, debts dissolved without struggle, doors opened that I had not even knocked upon, and I realized I was no longer forcing manifestation. I was allowing it. The law never fails, but man often fails the law by wavering, and I had learned the power of unwavering expectancy. When fear whispered, I answered aloud, "Infinite intelligence is managing this for me." When delay appeared, I smiled and said, "This is only the interval before revelation." For the subconscious mind, obedient servant that it is, took my calm assurance as command and went to work with tireless precision. I learned that repetition over 21 days is not magic, it is mental discipline, the art of impressing truth until it becomes natural, effortless, inevitable. By the final days, joy replaced effort, gratitude replaced pleading, and faith felt less like hope and more like memory. I understood then that manifestation is not about attracting something distant, it is about removing resistance to what is already promised. And so, if you walk this path for 21 days, walk it crowned, not crawling. Speak boldly, feel deeply, release completely. For the moment you align your word with divine law, the unseen moves at once, and what you dare to claim with certainty must, by law, appear. By the third unfolding, something sacred settled into my bones, and I understood why Florence spoke of faith as a fixed attitude of mind, not an emotional flutter that comes and goes. I was no longer practicing manifestation, I was living from the end. My words had become so natural that even silence agreed with me. I noticed how swiftly life obeys when one stops contradicting one's own good with fear, impatience, or idle speech. I guarded my mouth as one guards treasure, for I had learned that every careless sentence is a seed and every faithful declaration is a covenant. When appearances dared to challenge me, I refused to wrestle them, for what you resist persists and what you bless dissolves into harmony. I said only good can come to me and only good can come from me, and watched situations rearrange themselves without effort or explanation. There were moments, oh yes, when the old self attempted a return, whispering, "What if it doesn't work?" But I answered with serene authority, "It is already working in ways I cannot yet perceive." And that was the turning point. For the subconscious mind bows not to force but to calm certainty. I felt guided, protected, upheld by an invisible intelligence that never sleeps and never misses a detail. Inspiration replaced struggle, right actions revealed themselves effortlessly, I was led, not pushed. I realized then that the 21 days were never about time, but about alignment, about teaching the mind to dwell so long in truth that truth becomes its only residence. Manifestation ceased to feel miraculous and began to feel lawful, inevitable, exact. And I say to you now with the calm joy of one who has proved the promise, when your words are spoken with conviction, your heart is free from doubt, and your mind is anchored in divine expectancy, the universe does not ask if, it only asks how soon. By the final days, I stood in awe not of what had arrived, but of what had fallen away. Fear no longer ruled my conversations, impatience no longer quickened my breath, and the old habit of waiting had dissolved into quiet certainty. I understood then that manifestation is not a chase, but a state of being, and Florence was right when she said that man moves mountains by changing his word. I spoke only what I wished to see made flesh, and the universe listened with reverence. I no longer begged life for signs, I became the sign. The outer world mirrored my inner decree with astonishing obedience. Timing aligned, people shifted, obstacles vanished without apology. I learned that when you repeat a truth long enough, it ceases to be repetition and becomes identity. By the 21st day, my affirmation no longer felt like a sentence I spoke, but a law I lived. I trusted without clinging, expected without strain, and rested without fear, for divine order had taken the throne of my mind. And this is the revelation I leave with you: manifestation is not the reward for effort, but the reflection of alignment. Speak your word as one who remembers, not one who hopes. Hold your vision with joy, not tension. For when the mind is impressed with certainty and the heart beats with gratitude, the unseen rushes forward to meet you, and what you have claimed in consciousness must, without delay, appear in form. And now, as I look back upon those sacred days, I see with crystal clarity that the greatest miracle was not what manifested, but the awakening that took place within me. I learned that repetition is not persuasion, but proclamation, not pleading, but possession. Each word I spoke carved a deeper channel in my mind through which divine power could flow without obstruction. Florence taught that imagination is God in man, and I finally dared to imagine boldly, without apology, without compromise. I no longer asked if I was worthy, for worthiness is not earned, it is assumed. I spoke as one who had already received, and the universe responded with speed that left logic bewildered. What once seemed impossible bowed politely and stepped aside. Circumstances rearranged themselves with elegant precision, people appeared as if summoned by an unseen script, and solutions arrived before problems could fully form. I realized that when you repeat a truth with feeling, the subconscious accepts it as law, and law knows no opposition. Doubt lost its voice because I stopped feeding it with attention. Fear dissolved because I refused to give it language. I became exquisitely selective with my thoughts, for I understood that every inner conversation is a prophecy. By the end of this journey, I was no longer asking life to change. I had changed my concept of life, and life had no choice but to follow. This is the secret the world overlooks. Manifestation is inevitable when the mind is disciplined in truth and the heart is anchored in faith. And so I say to you, with the certainty of lived proof, repeat your word for 21 days, not as a hopeful experiment, but as a divine command. Speak until your voice carries authority, feel until belief becomes natural, persist until faith feels effortless. For when the mind no longer wavers and the soul no longer waits, the unseen moves with unstoppable force, and what you have impressed upon consciousness must, by eternal law, step boldly into form. And as the echo of those days still lives within me, I tell you this with a calm fire in my voice: once you have proven the law, you can never unknow it. Life no longer feels uncertain when you realize that every condition is first a thought seeking permission to appear. I stopped fearing circumstances, for circumstances are only shadows cast by old beliefs, and shadows dissolve the moment light is applied. Florence spoke of the word as a living power, and I witnessed it breathe, move, and perform through me when I aligned my speech with divine truths. No matter what appeared, I answered only with certainty, for certainty is the language the subconscious obeys. I learned to bless what I desired instead of condemning what I saw, and in that blessing, resistance vanished. Even delays revealed themselves as protection, even detours as divine strategy. I no longer demanded outcomes, I trusted orchestration. With every repetition, my mind became quieter, steadier, more obedient to the higher command within me. Faith matured into knowing, and knowing matured into peace. I walked through my days with an inner smile, aware that the unseen was working tirelessly on my behalf. This is the final initiation of the 21-day journey, the realization that you were never manifesting alone. Infinite intelligence moves when you agree with it, and once you do, it spares no detail. So speak gently, firmly, fearlessly. Let your word be clean, your feeling be rich, your expectancy be relaxed. For when you align thought, word, and belief, the universe does not deliberate, it delivers. And so I close this revelation not as a teacher above you, but as a witness beside you, for what I have lived is available to all who dare to trust the law. I no longer measure life by appearances, for I know now that the unseen is always ahead of the seen, preparing, arranging, perfecting. The habit of fear has no home in me, because fear cannot survive where understanding reigns. I speak my word once, I repeat it with joy, and then I release it with the serenity of one who knows the harvest is inevitable. This is the mastery Florence hinted at, the moment when faith ceases to be effort and becomes atmosphere. I walk knowing that divine order goes before me, makes the crooked places straight, and brings my good by ways that astonish the mind and delight the soul. And if you remember nothing else from my story, remember this. Manifestation is not about forcing life to obey you, but about aligning yourself so fully with truth that life has no choice but to respond. Speak your word as law, feel it as finished, and move forward without looking back. For when belief is steady, the subconscious is impressed, and divine intelligence is trusted, your good rushes toward you with perfect timing, and what you have declared in faith must, without exception, come to pass.